Assalamu alaikum. So, as I promised, I'm a little bit late, but I said that I would come on and talk to you guys about my African ancestry results and tell you a little bit about why I did it and the importance of it. So, I'm going to do that. But what I would like to know is, all right, so let me give you a little history. Obviously, if I'm looking for my African ancestry, I'm African American. And as an African American, when you meet people who are from the continent of Africa, everybody has you look like my people, you look like my people, you look like these people. So I have been given attributes to just about every single country in Africa. But where do you think my ancestors are from? Obviously, they're from several places in Africa, as with most African Americans. But if you know anything about how African tribes look, what are their features, tell me where you think I would be from. Little guessing game. So, if you don't know who I am, my name is Mubaraka Ibrahim. I am a health and happiness coach, but today we are going to talk more about the happiness because I found out who my people is. And I'm going to tell you guys who they are according to the DNA results that I got. So I'll give you a little bit of background about what I've been doing over the last couple of years. So maybe about, I would say 3 years ago, I decided that I wanted to know what was my African ancestry, or what my ancestry was in general. So that was about 3 years ago. I am African American, meaning I am descendant from enslaved Africans in America. My parents were born in America. Their parents were born in America. Their parents were born in America. Back to whatever great-grandparents were taken from Africa and enslaved, right? My parents both were born in the exotic land of Brooklyn, New York. That's where they're from. Oh, no. Let me go back. My mother was actually born in Suffolk, Virginia, and then moved to Brooklyn, New York, and was raised in Brooklyn. My father was born and raised in Brooklyn. So as most African Americans have a history in the southern United States, and then many migrated to the north once, particularly during first migration was right after slavery ended. Second migration was during the civil rights era. And so my grandparents on my mother's side was a part of that migration during the civil rights era, actually before. When we talk about lineage and heritage, so it's a very challenging topic for many African Americans, because if we're lucky, we can go back 2 or 3 generations, meaning what we know and what has been verbally passed down to us. So I know stories about my great-grandparents, but I know nothing at all about my great-great-grandparents. And that, for me in particular, is specifically on my mother's side. My mother was a storyteller. So she would tell us stories all the time about her grandparents, which are my great-grandparents, but I have never heard any stories about their parents, or what happened in slavery and what happened when they gained their freedom, right? The stories really, for me and my family, began in sharecropping days. My great-grandparents on my mom's side, I know that my great-grandfather was a sharecropper. And my mother grew up on a farm where she was helping her grandpa on many days in sharecropping. So that's as far as I go back on my mom's side. On my father's side, I actually can't tell you much beyond my grandparents. I know the names of my great-grandparents, but I know nothing about who they are, where they were, besides what I have deciphered from my research. So, one of the things that I did 3 years ago was I went to a site of Ancestry.com. So if you've never heard of them, they are a website that will track your DNA. So this is the beautiful thing about technology. So what they do and how they do it, as far as I understand it, is they have taken DNA samples from people throughout the entire world. And there are certain DNA markers that will say, this is the marker of people who are from Ghana or from Nigeria. There's actually like tags in our DNA, or even people from Italy or people from France, things like that, right? So it actually tells you where your ancestors are from because those markers are inherited, right? So yes, we are human beings. Everybody's a human being, but there is a difference between DNA-wise between an African and somebody from Europe. And we know this, which has been reaffirmed in the Quran, when Allah tells us that He has made us of different tribes and nations so that we may come to know one another, not so that we may despise one another. So Allah confirms to us that we're not all exactly the same, right? He's intentionally made us different, right? So when I got that DNA test done, what Ancestry.com does is they actually give you something that is very general. So it tells you the country. And as we know that within a country, there could be lots of different tribes or different types of people. So I should have pulled that up. For Ancestry.com, it showed me that I was, if I remember these numbers correctly, I believe I shared them here as well, that I was 86% African. My DNA shows that 86% of it African from various tribes or various countries, and the rest was European. And within that European line, the biggest portion was, believe it or not, Irish. I think I was like, 10% or something like that. Maybe it was like 8. Irish. There's actually a little teeny bit of Scandinavia in there and a little teeny bit of European Jew. Interesting stuff behind that. I'll talk about that in a minute. So if you aren't familiar with kind of like the history of being African American, as Africans were as Africans were brought to America and they were enslaved, they pretty much grouped everybody together. They banned anybody from speaking a native tongue. They banned religious practice. They banned tradition so that they could strip the African away from everything that connected them to their motherland to give them identity, right? So for many African Americans, we cannot say, well, for all of us really, we cannot say we have this tradition that has been going on for 500 years or 1,000 years, because we literally do not know, because colonizers intentionally robbed us and separated us from any type of cultural identity, any type of tribal identity, and any type of humanity. And so for African Americans, it is, I think it was James Baldwin who said that to be African American is to be African without the memory and American without the privilege. Meaning that we know that we came from Africa, but Africa is an entire continent. We know because of the slave trade that we came from mostly Western Africa, right? So you're talking about Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Benin. We know we came from that area, but there's a huge amount of variation, right? Somebody from Ghana can very clearly tell you their cultural difference, their language difference, their traditions are very different from somebody who's from Nigeria, right? But as African Americans, we don't necessarily know that. So after I got the DNA from Ancestry.com that told me that the greatest African percentage in country that I have DNA markers from was Benin and Togo. So Benin and Togo. So I do have a little bit of Nigeria, very small amount, which means that maybe I had maybe a great-grandparent or a great-great-great-grandparent who was from Nigeria, or from Benin and Togo, I believe was like 27%, which was a large percentage for my DNA because it was a variety. I had a small percentage from Ghana, a small percentage from Nigeria, but the largest percentage, and then I had, I think the second largest was Bantu. So we know Bantu is not a country, right? It is a tribe, but it covers a large part of Africa. The only thing that we know, well, that I know about Bantu is that it covers a really large area of Africa from west all the way down to the south. And it also is, Bantu is actually the original people, right? When we talk about tracing back to who was like the first human beings, right? Scientists believe that the Bantu was actually the first people. So that's really interesting. My husband is very proud that he had a large percentage of Bantu. So shout out to the Bantu Nation. Nadira, I think that it really does matter because West Africa is a variety of cultures and identities and tradition. Everybody in West Africa isn't the same. So I wanted to know more detail. So when I got Ancestry.com back, they also have a huge database. So even if you don't use their DNA test, I know some people don't want to do that, I actually would recommend their site for you, just if you are American, to actually just go and try to research all of the people in your family, because they have everything from death certificates to army registrations to census forms, and you can literally go and look at a census from like 1890 and see my grandparent lived at this address and the census said that she had 2 children at the time and they were 1 and 5 years old, right? So I saw things that detailed. The interesting things that I found out about my family from Ancestry.com is that I was actually able to look at death certificates of uncles and grandparents and cousins, and I found that on my father's side, I think I came across maybe about 8 or 9, and everybody actually passed away from a high blood pressure associated disease. Aneurysms and strokes. And if you follow me for any time, you may know that my father actually passed away when he was 55. I was 11 years old from a stroke induced by high blood pressure. My grandmother died from an aneurysm. I have his sister, an aunt who died from an aneurysm. So this is a really strong genetic component on my side. So every time I go to the doctor and my blood pressure is low, I'm like, yes. I am not going to continue this trend. I'm doing everything I can, right, to break that health curse that goes along the family line. So that was actually a really interesting. I only had 1 death certificate of all of the ones that I found where a relative on my father's side died from a kidney disease. But everybody else, they all passed away from high blood pressure associated illnesses. And that was interesting and eye-opening. So I knew it was strong from the people that I know during my lifetime, like my father and his sister and my grandparents, but I didn't know it was such a strong link inside of my ancestors on his side. So that was actually really interesting. The other thing that I learned with Ancestry.com is that it had me to really look into kind of like, how did I get so mixed up, right? So how do we as Black people get mixed up with, for example, I am 1% European Jewish. How you like them apples? And so one of the things that I found, which was very interesting when you think about the history of slavery in the world in particular, which was Jewish people during time of slavery were very adamant that they did not keep slaves. However, Jewish people were actually a lot of the slave traders. So they didn't keep slaves, but they traded and transported them. And when you're at sea with a whole bunch of Black women for a long time, what they did was they actually would rape them. And some resulted in actual babies, right? So that could be, and I don't know this for certain, of course, because I had nobody to tell me what happened 400 years ago on a ship. But seeing that I have European Jewish DNA in my blood, I can make a pretty good assumption as to some of the things. So here's a really interesting story, which I'll share with you, that I actually didn't believe at first, but it's really interesting. So my mother's father, so this is a legend in our family. My mother's father used to tell us, so this is my grandfather, he used to tell us that his grandfather was Irish, and we never really believed him. We were like, yeah, okay, you don't look Irish, right? You're Black. And he told us that he was Irish, and he was actually Irish royalty, but he fell in love with a Black woman, and they were going to kill him because he could not be in love with a Black woman. So him and his wife escaped Ireland to the United States. And he said that that is actually, how we got African American in our blood from his side, right? So you're thinking that this is like a fourth or eighth of whatever. And to be honest, we never really believed Grandpa. He was a really big storyteller. But just so happened, the largest European DNA that I actually have in my system is Irish. So maybe Grandpa was telling the truth. I have no idea. So that's interesting. All right. So Ancestry.com gave me told me the countries that I have DNA marker for inside of my blood. Or in my DNA. But it did not tell me what part comes from my mother, what part comes from my father. AfricanAncestry.com, so it is a website, and you can spell it out and put it inside of Google. They have a test that is specifically for African Americans, and it is matrilineal and patrilineal, which means they will trace your mother's side separate from your father's side. And when they trace it, they will actually tell you the DNA royalty. I'm reading your comment. The DNA heritage from 500 to 2,000 years. Like, where did your people come from 500 years ago? So it connects you. So for African Americans, it's a big jump over 400 years of slavery that we'll never be able to trace. And it goes back to before we were enslaved, which is awesome because our history is not slavery. Slavery interrupted our history. So it was really important for me to find out where my people are from. So I decided to trace my dad's side. So in order to do this, what they do is they send you a little kit. I could not take it because obviously I'm a female and it is a test for male. So I had to find someone who was a male direct relative, meaning their father and my father is the same. I only have one brother who lives away and cannot take it. And he has a son that lives near me who agreed to take it for me. So my father is my nephew's grandfather. And what the test does is that it traces the Y chromosome that's passed down from father to son to father to son to father to son. And what that Y chromosome has told us, are you ready? To tell you who my peoples are. And if you know my peoples, tag them in this video and tell them this is your peoples. I am from the Bisa tribe. Woo! So, the Bisa tribe. The Bisa tribe and so this is actually my husband's certificate. So here's the funny part. You want to know real funny? My husband did his and he's Bisa too. So I guess at some point back there we were cousins. All right. So this is my husband's certificate. This is what they actually send you, like this. I got one exactly like it. It is a certificate of ancestry. And it says the Bisa people living in Burkina Faso. So that is who our people are, the Bisa people who live in Burkina Faso. So here's the interesting thing. So when I started looking, and of course you want to like say, okay, how does this connect with what I got from Ancestry? So what I found is that Bisa people of Burkina Faso, they are also located in northern Ghana and at the northernmost tip of Benin and Togo. And that actually matches perfectly with what Ancestry.com told me, because my largest percentage was Benin and Togo. And then I have another percentage that is the people of Ghana, right? So I am from Bisa. Well, my father's father's side, we are Bisa people of Benin and Togo, probably the greatest likelihood of we are Bisa of Togo. And so the Bisa history is really interesting. So what I found out, and how do I connect this to being African American? And I'm trying to just give you guys like factual information. There's a lot of emotional unpacking that I still have to do, right? So when you sit and you think about, you know, how did your people go from, you know, Africa to here, and how did we end up so mixed up? That's a whole nother live. We could talk about that at a different time. So I'm gonna give you some factual stuff. So the Bisa people of Togo, they are, so here's a little interesting fact, traditionally majorly Muslim. And for me, that's a really significant fact, because one of the things that we know as descendants of enslaved African, that between 30 to 50% of the Africans who were enslaved were actually Muslim. They took them from Muslim areas of West Africa. The reason why they actually, so we also know that they took no Christians, right? Christians, African Americans are not traditionally Christians. Enslaved Africans were not traditionally Christians, because one of the things that colonizers did do is they didn't believe that you can enslave your Christian brothers. So they actually took people who were either Muslim or followed some traditional religion or things like that. So we know that the Christianity that African Americans in America practiced was that which was taught to them by their slave masters. Their ancestors did not practice that because the enslavers did not take Christian Africans. They only took Muslim and traditional religion Africans, right? So it also gave me confidence that my heritage of people in my family, that they actually were Muslim. It's very likely that they were Muslim. And so even though I did not convert to Islam, I was born Muslim, my parents converted. And so for my father in particular, it was just him returning to his tradition as opposed to converting to Islam. He was indeed reverting to Islam. And so that was actually really satisfying, I have to admit. All right. No shade to any of my non-Muslim family. I got a lot of non-Muslim family, but it was quite satisfying. So we know that even today, a little over 50% of BSAP people are still Muslim, still practicing Muslim. BSAP people were, so according to the historians, they were traditionally from other parts of Africa and the Middle East, and they settled in the area of Burkina Faso and Ghana and Togo. They settled in that area about 1,300 years ago. And they are believed to originally actually, so going back even before Africa, they are believed to originally have migrated to Burkina Faso from Egypt. This is what the historians say and track in the Bisa people. So that is also very interesting. The other thing that I found out about Bisa people is, which makes sense in terms of being sold into slavery, is the Bisa tribe is a caste tribe, meaning that they have royalty, they have common people, it's a caste system, and they actually engaged in lots of inter-tribe battles. And they would take slaves from the tribe that they overcame in the battle. So hold that for a second. Now, what we know about the slave trade is that Africans, yes, indeed, sold other Africans to white Europeans who came to Africa, right? So that's what we know about the slave trade. What we also know about the slave trade is the form of slavery for Africans was much more akin to indentured servitude than it was to the colonized version of slavery, where you were born as a slave, you die as a slave, every child you had was owned by the enslaved. Like, that was not the type of slavery that Africans actually practice. Their practice of slavery was different, right? So we know that colonizers took what was known as slavery for Africans and created an entire evil beast around this idea of slavery. It was not the same type of slavery. So when Africans were selling their African brothers, their neighbor tribesmen to Europeans, they were selling them under the auspices that, oh, this is slavery like we do slavery. We take them and then they can earn their freedom. So if you watch the movie Roots, right? So if you're African American, and particularly the newer version of Roots, you will see that one of the things that Alex Haley made a part of the dialogue is when Kunta Kinte first arrived at the plantation, he was asking, who's in charge? How long do I have to work here, right? So he was under the assumption, okay, I've been captured, I'm a slave, I'm going to have to do this labor for a certain amount of time, but at what point can I go home to my people? But there was no point of going home to his people, right? And so I think that it's really interesting that Alex Haley, who wrote Roots, actually made that a part of the dialogue, right? These little things, that which is why I love arts and things like that, because it really does, if you pay attention, right, it really does teach you a lot. So that was one of the parts that Alex Haley actually put in to bring attention to inside of Roots. So knowing this, and also knowing, so remember over here I told you to unpack for a second that it was a caste system, and Bisa people did take captives from wars and things like that. So over here we also know that Africans sold other Africans into 2 Europeans. And then the other thing that we know, which is connected directly to my heritage, is Benin was the first Africans who sold other Africans to European colonizer. Historical fact, the president of Benin actually did an official state apology to African Americans a couple of years ago, so we do know that. So now it all comes together for me. So if my people are the Bisa of Benin and Togo, which is the largest percentage that I have, and Benin was the first country to sell Africans to white colonizers, then I can put all of that together and say, okay, my father's father was sold into slavery, possibly, most likely under these conditions. And that is where I am so far in my African ancestry. So my next part of my journey is going to be to find out my mother's side. So my mother's side is going to be much more interesting because I actually don't know, like, as far as like what part of my DNA is from her side. Is it mostly the European? Will I be able to trace who my mother's mother is? Like, so that is going to be really interesting. So 500 to 1,000. Oh, let me read you. Let me see if I got see the letter around here somewhere. Okay. So they send you a letter like this when you do African ancestry. And it says, it is with great pleasure that I report your patriclan analysis successfully identified your paternal genetic ancestry. By analyzing your Y chromosome DNA, we have determined that you share paternal genetic ancestry with Bisa people of Burkina Faso today. Below is a copy of your Y chromosome polymorphism used in the analysis. You have inherited this segment of DNA through your father, and it has been passed consistently from father and son for the last 500 to 2,000 years. So this jumps all of slavery and tells me where my father's people were taken from in Africa. Our scientists compared your Y chromosome polymorphisms to those people around the world and found a 100% match to samples from the Bisa people of Burkina Faso today. Your sequence similarity score is 100%, reflects our level of confidence in the accuracy of your match. So it is a 100% match, which, by the way, my husband also got 100% match from Burkina Faso, Bisa people. So that is my African ancestry. So if I got any of my Bisa people online following me, hey people, let's connect. Is there like a Bisa Facebook group? What we got going on? So, all right. That is all for the day. I'm going to go relish in being Bisa, knowing my people, and figuring out how I'm going to find my mama's people. So that is the next step. I gotta go find who the rest of my peoples is. So I know my father's father was Bisa. Now, who is my mother's mother's mother? Now I'm thinking about it. Maybe I should trace my mother's father too. I may be able to put it all together for my children. So at another time, we'll talk about the emotional impact of finding your ancestors and where you are from and how we hope that it impacts our children and their children. So now that I am a queen mother, I would like to tell my granddaughter who her people are. We would like to find what are our traditions, which I'm excited to actually go find now because now I know that they were probably Muslim. All right. All right. I will talk to you guys later. And of course, before I leave, you have like 6 hours for the Cyber Monday Burn Belly Fat Challenge sale. So mr40method.com, mr40method.com. Go check it out. All right? Go check it out. All right. Talk to you guys tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. All right. Assalamu alaikum.